The Colorado Authors League presents The Cal Zone, the League's official podcast. Welcome to a place for tasty conversation about books, art, and more, all created by members of the Colorado Authors League. Here's your host, Tricia Copeland.
Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. This is Sarah V. Barnes. She is a historical fiction author and, of course, a Cal member. She has produced an audiobook, and I can't wait to hear all about your story and your tips and suggestions for other people thinking about audiobooks.
Well, it certainly was a learning experience.
Well, just start me off on the journey where it began, how you started, what pitfalls.
Well, I knew I wanted to make an audiobook of the first book in my series, She Who Rides Horses. And my first choice for doing the voice being the voice artist was actually Linda Kohanev, who is my mentor, and it was one of her workshops that I was attending when I even came up with the idea for the book in the first place. And she has this melodious voice. She was on radio, gets the story, would have been a perfect voiceover artist, and actually offered to do it. And her husband is a Grammy-winning producer, music artist, and has a production studio. They could have done the whole thing. Stuff came up in Linda's life, and she said, really, I can't do this when the time came. And so then I pivoted to trying to find another professional whose voice I thought would work. I really didn't want to do it myself because I'm not an actor. And I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, so I know how big a difference it makes whether the voice works for the story. And I was quite sure that I was not the talent for that. And so I actually, ACX, which is the Audible, the audiobook production part of Amazon and Audible, makes it pretty easy to audition professional artists. You upload your manuscript, and then you create a trial script and put it out there for people to audition. You can put in filters for what parameters you're looking for. Do you want an English accent, an American accent, young, old, all the parameters you can imagine. And I actually did end up selecting somebody, and we got along great and did some sort of pre-production notes. And then she went ahead and actually recorded the whole thing. And I got it back. And even though I'd listened to some snippets and thought, yeah, she sounds great, when I started listening to the actual recording, it just was not right. And then I thought, okay, maybe this is just me. And so I sent portions of it to several people whom I really trusted, including Linda, but people that I knew that knew the story, knew me, knew what I was looking for, and would give me an honest answer about how this sounded. And actually the response I got was cringe. So it wasn't just me. And so then I recorded literally like on my computer, on my phone, myself reading portions of it. And I sent that to the same people. And everybody was like, yeah, you can do this. You can do this, including Linda, and she said, I always thought you should do this yourself because it's your story.
Naya rose to her feet, blue eyes intent on the horizon. It didn't matter that she might be seen. The herd was too far away to take flight. She could just make out their individual shapes, moving slowly, partially obscured by the tall, waving grasses.
And the final sort of what tipped me over was talking to my daughters about it. They were the ones that listened to me read them bedtime stories growing up. And they're, and they're also very honest with me. And they said, yeah, Mom, you can absolutely do this. And so at that point, I was about 6 weeks into the whole process of deciding, okay, I'm going to do this audiobook. And I did have an engineer that I had connected with actually I did a reading and sort of book intro at the Boulder Bookstore when the first book came out in 2022. And he was in the audience for that book signing and came up to me afterwards and said, hey, I produce audiobooks if you ever want to make an audiobook. And he's local here in Longmont. And so I dug up his name, reached out to him and said, I'm getting ready to do this. And I think I want to do it myself. And can you help me? And so I went over to his studio, and he likewise was super supportive and said, absolutely, you can do this. And, I can do as much or as little of the editing as you want. Basically, he said, he would shepherd me through the process. So I guess that would be my two first pieces of advice. Ask trusted sources about whether you think you can do this, or you should get hire talent, and then work with a really supportive engineer if you yourself don't have that skill set. So then the next step was actually starting the recording, and he got me set up with the right equipment that was easy to use. We have a walk-in closet, and that's where, what ended up being the best space. It took me October, November, December, January, 4 months to actually get the recording the way I wanted it to sound. He ended up not actually doing very much editing because the software that I was using, which now I can't think of the name of, but I could look it up, was very intuitive. And eventually I figured out not only how to use the software to edit, but also what made the most sense for me in terms of process. Whether I started out reading small chunks and going back and fixing them, but then I learned that for me anyway, it was better. And there's an analogy here to how people write, whether they just write straight out and then go back and edit, or whether they write a little, edit, write a little. And I'm usually a write a little bit, go back, edit, write a little bit, go back, edit. With the audiobook, I just had to read like whole chunks at a time and then go back and edit. And finally, at the end of 4 months, I had something that I was really actually pretty proud of.
That's really great. But so my first question is, you probably had to pay the ACX person, right?
I did.
Yeah. So yeah, that's hard. I had a hard experience with ACX. It was interesting to me that you said, oh, it was really easy to find someone. Because when I first put my book out there, didn't get very many pings. And then I got one ping and I liked her voice. And I decided to go with her, and we signed a contract. Then she kept asking for more money. And they explicitly say there, no, you don't pay them separately. Your contract amount is how much you pay them when you finish. But she kept asking for more money. And I said, okay, no, I'm not going to work with this person. So I broke that contract. Then I found another person that I liked, and she kept putting me off. And then finally was like, I can't do this. My voice is bad. I'm sick. And I was like, oh, I felt bad. But then it was like, okay, I'm from square zero again. So I ended up tabling it, and then meeting someone at a book event, meeting a narrator that was just coming around and passing out her card. And I was like, okay, this is a real life in-person person who I'm meeting. And she gave me some samples. But the samples are pretty short. You're right. They're 3 minutes or something. So the person can make their voice sound a certain way and you really like it, but then it sounds different when they actually record it.
With a novel where you have characters and there's a certain there's a certain rhythm that you're used to hearing in your own head, and then that's not what you hear when they read the story.
Right. Yeah. I guess you might have that free bias
Yeah,
with your own book, obviously.
yeah, and
Is
that
your
makes it
book a
tough.
first person point of view, or is it what point of view
No,
is it?
it's in third person,
Okay.
and that was one of the things that um, that terrified me, honestly, was trying to do different voices for the dialogue. And I finally just decided not to worry too much about it and let it just kind of emerge organically. Um, and yeah, so that was the biggest hurdle to get over.
Yeah, I learned so much. So I've had four different narrators for three different series, two different series, a male, female, and then my third narrator got sick. And wasn't able to do it. I mean, I loved all my narrators, and so now I have a new one, and they've all been really good. But I chose them, and I did a lot of research, and I had recommendations. But one thing I learned, I knew nothing about audio or acting or anything. Like when my male narrator said, "Well, do you want Keanu Reeves or do you want so and so?" I was like, "Oh, I can choose my voice." So that was like a learning thing for me. Is like they can pitch their voices differently. But the female narrator that I got first, I had two female main character books from female POVs, right? And then two male ones. The female narrator is like, I can't do a whole book in a male voice. So that's
Mhm.
when she like gave me a couple of people that she knew, and I interviewed them and was able to choose a male narrator for those male POV books.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting learning that they can pitch their voice different or make it sound a little bit different. Um, Depending, but that would be for me, it would be really hard
Yeah,
to switch up the voice.
doing the male voices and having no voice training. Yeah, it
Right.
was yeah.
Yeah, and to switch up all the voices, I think my narrators like color code their books, so
Mm,
that each character has a different color code and they remember what tone of voice they need to speak in for that color code. So that was interesting learning, as well as like getting that initial file when they're like, "How do you pronounce this? How do you pronounce this?" In a fantasy book, well, and maybe historical fiction, that was really important too, I would guess.
well, and because so mine is set in 4000 BC on the steppes of what are now southern Russia and Ukraine, and part of the dynamic of the actual history is that is the origin of Proto-Indo-European, which is a reconstructed language that is the mother tongue, if you will, of all Indo-European languages. So there were a group of people about that time in that place that were speaking this language that linguists have reconstructed based on similarities between modern Indo-European languages. But I am not a linguist and I don't understand, what all the diacritical marks mean. But I used a dictionary of the reconstructed language to provide names of characters and words in dialogue. And so yeah, I had to my original narrator and then myself, I had to figure out, okay, how are we going to pronounce these words? And in the first book in the series, there are a limited number of characters, and I did not do as much of introducing those Proto-Indo-European words. In the second book in the series, which has been out now for a year, and I should probably be thinking about doing the recording for that one, I used way more words, and there are far more characters. I'm like, so.
Well, that could be a challenge. Yeah. So, how many hours a day and how many days a week were you recording during those 4 months?
It was pretty intense. I'd say, probably I'd probably work maybe 4 days out of 7, like really solid from, 9 o'clock in the morning till 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Because I found that the 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 product I ended up with was most usable if I worked in big chunks like that.
Okay.
rather than trying to do it in snatches here and there. I think we know that you make things work depending on what your schedule is. The last part of it, editing, I could do anywhere. I edited I was telling you earlier, my daughter and son-in-law currently live in Australia. And while I was doing all this, I was flying over there to help my daughter. And I did a lot of editing on the plane, 16 hours on a flight from San Francisco to Melbourne. You can get a lot done because I just had my headphones on and I was using the editing software. But then I also recorded at their house. I just brought my stuff with me. So yeah, I tried to do it in set like a whole day aside. I have a lot of control over my schedule. I'm old and retired and and my kids are grown, and I do have a horse that needs my attention, but I can be pretty flexible with my time. But it was just, it's not unlike when you're in the throes of writing a book. If you don't carve out that time and make it a priority, and sort of get into the rhythm, at least for me, get into the rhythm of what I'm writing, it's really a hard thing to do in snatches of time.
Right. How important do you think it was to have your friend Linda, who was a voice artist, and have the engineer walk you through all those parts and learning curves?
It certainly helped. That's for sure. I mean, Linda in giving me the confidence that I could do it. And then the engineer, just in terms of if I had a question about how the software worked, or and then I did send him the tracks, and he did the final cleanup, and I really don't. I could probably teach myself, but I don't really know all the ins and outs of how he balanced stuff. And I will say the software was amazingly easy to pick up, and I'm not a very gifted sort of digital person, but I would say it's most important if there is an engineer, a sound engineer that you can work with, that is familiar with producing audiobooks. Yeah, in the same way that having a good editor is
Right.
important to, yeah.
And did you get any tips for like saving your voice and speaking correctly so that your voice didn't get run down, or any things like
I
that?
probably could have gotten more instruction than I did on that score. I sort of taught myself again as I was going along, and somebody else may listen to the finished product and think, boy, she could have done that a lot better. It's a little bit the way, again, I hadn't really thought of this before, but as we're having this conversation, it's becoming more and more clear to me. I approach this very much the way I approached writing my novels. So I didn't intend to write a novel. I was at this workshop at Linda's, and it was working with horses to open creative, intuitive pathways. And on the third day, she sort of turned us loose at the end of the day and said, just write whatever comes. And I got this whole download and started this novel. And I was not an English major. I mean, I do have a PhD in history, but I was not an English major. I mean, the last English course I took was as a junior in high school. The first chunk that I gave to an editor, she came back with, your head hopping in this scene, have one POV. And I had to go back to her and say, what does POV stand for? But I learned fast, and I specifically decided not to go to any writing workshops or do a lot of reading about how to be a better writer, because I was worried that it would get in the way of the process I was already in. Like I had this story coming in, and I really just wanted to honor the story and write and not get self-conscious about the writing. And nobody told me, you can't write a novel. I just did it. And nobody told me, in fact, everybody told me you can record an audiobook. And so I just did it. And I probably could have Googled, how do you modulate your voice? How do you do X, Y, and Z? But, and maybe I will for the next one. But I just did it.
You've been listening to the Cal Zone, the official podcast of the Colorado Authors League, supporting and promoting its creative community since 1931. Learn more about us at coloradoauthors.org. This is a production of the nonprofit Colorado Authors League.